This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
And welcome into a Monday edition, the warm-up. I'm Josh Hennig, here hanging out with you the day after Father's Day, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. I hope everyone had a great weekend. I hope some of you took my advice on Saturday, because you asked for winners on the UFC fights on Saturday. I gave you two. So, shout out to Jason, who tweeted at me on Twitter that he put in the money and he won some money. Hey, man, I'm just here to try to make everybody's weekend good. If you're a father, happy Father's Day. Hope you had a good weekend with your family. We got a lot to get to here on the sports. Of course, sports match coming up after the warm-up, but here on the warm-up, Kevin Durso, our 97.3 Flyers insider, will join us coming up at 1:25 because, listen, between myself and then the sports bash with Mike Gale and Hunter Brody coming up next on 97.3 ES, we got a lot of ground to cover. A lot of ground to cover. It's been a wacky weekend in sports, and I don't mean wacky in all good things. There's been a lot of messiness, a lot of sloppiness, a lot of, shall I call it, conflicting stories going on. So we got a lot to get to. The NHL, could they be going to Canada? What's going on with the hub cities? Reports are it's down to 3, or could it be down to 6? We'll get into all that coming up next with Kevin Durso at 1:25 here on 97.3 ESPN. But I got to start the show talking about the news that popped off late last night and now is a story that has been growing and growing throughout the morning and into the afternoon, and that is Dak Prescott. So, for those who didn't hear, Dak Prescott is reportedly going to sign his $31.4 million franchise tag. So, what does that mean for the Eagles, though? Well, it means something significant. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But just to recap all this, you think about Dak Prescott in the last few years. This is a guy who's made about $5 million of NFL salaries in his career because he was a late-round pick. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't a second-round pick. Frankly, I don't think a lot of people thought he was ever going to be the starting quarterback for the Cowboys. I think a lot of people, were very negative about his NFL potential. That he comes in for Tony Romo. He has a very phenomenal preseason. He proves throughout his rookie season that he is the starting Cowboys quarterback and should be the starting Cowboys quarterback moving forward. Now, a few years later, you have to understand his position. There is that part of him that wants that long-term deal, that wants to be locked up and with the Cowboys for years to come. But you also have to consider the fact that the Cowboys have a lot of money committed to a lot of players right now. They just gave Zeke that huge contract. They had to re-sign Amari Cooper. In recent years, they've had to re-sign a lot of guys, from Jalen Smith to DeMarcus Lawrence. They have guys like Zach Martin and Tyron Smith under contract moving forward. The Cowboys have a lot of money divvied up. And you have to think that the drafting of CeeDee Lamb was a sign that they understand that they may or may not be able to keep Michael Gallup because of some of those financial restrictions. Well, with that in mind, the Cowboys have a completely different issue to deal with than the Eagles. See, the Eagles already have Carson Wentz locked up for a few years. And if you think about the Eagles' salary cap moving forward, yeah, the Eagles have a bunch of money that's going to hit the books in the next couple of years. But the good thing with the Wentz contract is that the Eagles have the opportunity to bail if they need to before it's all said and done. When you think about Carson Wentz's contract, the first few years of the contract is where the real heavy money is. But starting in 2022, the money is no longer guaranteed. And that dead cap money goes down each year after that. In fact, in Carson Wentz's age 32 season, which would be the final year of his current contract, if the Eagles were to move on from him, it's only about a $6 million cap hit. Now, the reason why that's important to realize is because when you look at the Eagles' salary cap situation moving forward, you realize that after the next couple of years, the Eagles are actually probably going to be okay financially. This year and next year is going to be a little bit tight. But once you get to 2022, it becomes a little less tenuous. And then each year after that, you see a little bit less of that fat money come off the books. And you have to think that the Eagles are looking forward, knowing that because they have Carson Wentz on a contract where they can move on from him or give him a contract extension down the road, knowing that some of the big contracts that are going to drop on that salary cap this year and next year, by the time you get to 2023, you only have a handful of contracts that are really big salary cap numbers. By the time you get to that year, you're pretty much in the clear of any serious salary cap impingements. Well, the reason why I mentioned 2023 is because Dak Prescott, according to reports, has talked about wanting to sign a 4-year, not a 5-year extension. So the end of Prescott's contract would line up in some ways with the end of Carson Wentz's contract. And for the Cowboys having to commit all the money they have to Elliott and to Cooper and to DeMarcus Lawrence, Jalen Smith, they got to have to eventually re-sign Leighton Vander Esch, their young linebacker. I'm going to assume they're going to give Zach Martin at some point an extension. You have to wonder if the Eagles are in a better position to maneuver in the future than the Cowboys. Because once Dak Prescott signs that tender, and it's not an extension, according to Adam Schefter, if they tag him again next year, you're talking about a jump from $31.4 million to $37 million. So if the Cowboys do the Kirk Cousins thing, which Washington did a couple years ago, and just plug him in back-to-back years on the franchise tag, that's actually not cost-effective for the Cowboys. The Cowboys have pigeonholed themselves because they prioritized the players around Dak before re-signing Dak. Meanwhile, the Eagles were different. The Eagles prioritized signing Wentz to a contract and then started taking care of the people around him. And when you look down the road and realize that Carson Wentz's contract is going to look less and less and smaller compared to the other quarterbacks in the league, like whenever Patrick Mahomes resigns, when Russell Wilson gets another extension on top of the one he already has, which makes him one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. We know Aaron Rodgers is highly paid, and he's way older than Prescott and Wentz is. Even Roethlisberger is going to make stupid large money this year. And if you think about the pandemic we're in, whether we want to be admit it or not, whether we like talking about this or not, we cannot lie to ourselves. Sports is going to suffer some repercussions from this pandemic. Listen, you can tell me till you're blue in the face about fans in NFL stadiums and NFL games. But until I see it, I do not believe we will see fans at NFL games at least for the first few months of the season. You look at the COVID rates across the country. COVID-19 has spiked over the last 2 weeks in 21 states. And of the states that it has spiked states like Texas and Florida, there are multiple teams in those states in the NFL. There's no way the NFL is going to give the clearance to say, well, you can have fans in Pittsburgh, but not in Tampa, because that gives one team an unfair advantage financially. The governor of Ohio has come out and said that he doesn't think it's a good idea to have fans in the near future at games. Specifically pointing to the Hall of Fame game, usually a game where there's a pilgrimage for a lot of the fans of the teams that get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Then they go to the game to see their teams play in that first preseason game. Well, there's a possibility there may not even be fans that first preseason game. And if there's an issue where you can't have fans, that is going to hurt the NFL's bottom line. Now, they'll be okay because like most of the sports, they make billions of dollars from their TV contracts, and with the revenue sharing that goes on in the NFL, teams are pretty much covered thanks to those TV contracts. And of course, can't forget about the marketing and the advertising deals. But without fans, there's a possibility that what was expected to be a rising salary cap for the NFL each of the next few years might not be there. Listen, you may have football, but don't tell me there's going to be fans there, because I don't think that's going to happen. And if there's not going to be fans, there's going to be less money to be had. And if there's going to be less money to be had, that salary cap doesn't go up. That salary cap doesn't come up. You know who's going to get punched in the face by it? The Dallas Cowboys. You've already locked in Zeke and Cooper and all these other guys to big contracts. And Dak's going to come up again next year. And when you look at the Dallas Cowboys moving forward, the Eagles look a lot more financially healthy than the Cowboys do. I mentioned that 2023. The Cowboys have not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but 7 players locked in to double-digit contracts in 2023. Double digits. By comparison, the Philadelphia Eagles, they only have 4. The Eagles have 4 guys in 2023 who have a salary cap number of double digits. The Cowboys have 7 in 2023. That means that in a few years, when the NFL is going to be going through a period potentially from the 2021 offseason, the 2022 offseason, heading into 2023, the NFL may have financially recovered by 2023, but the Cowboys may not have. You have numerous players who are long-term under big money contracts, huge financial deals, and that doesn't include the money they're going to have to sign Dak Prescott to. And if you think about it, that might be a huge reason why they drafted CeeDee Lamb, because they understand that Gallup might not be there in the near future. The Cowboys might not be able to afford both Dak and Gallup long term because they have 7 guys who are in big contracts through 2023. Meanwhile, the Eagles only have 4, which means the Eagles, as we go through what I think is going to be a downward dip in the NFL revenue and not an exploding salary cap as previously thought, might have to make some cuts to Cowboys, where the Eagles are going to be fine. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. And the furthest point, think about this. You don't think that Dak Prescott sees what's going on in the world right now and says, I've only made about $5 million in NFL salary. I've made most of my big money in endorsements off the field. And those endorsements may or may not be there in the next couple of years because of the pandemic that the world is going through and all the economic downturn. If I'm guaranteed over $31 million for this year, no matter what happens, I'm covered. I'm good. I'm secure. I got something to fall back on. You don't think that might be a factor in his thinking too? And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a factor in a lot of players' thinking. You think of a lot of players who have signed contracts this offseason. There's a lot of guaranteed money being thrown around. A big reason why those players signed that new CBA is because that new CBA gives them higher floor money. So if you're on the bottom rung of a roster, you're going to make more money moving forward. There's going to be more security for you moving forward. You don't think the players look around the world right now and see what's going on with the pandemic? They don't look around and see what's going on with the economy, how we have tens of millions of people unemployed in this country, and they say, man, I better get my money because I don't know if it's still going to be there. That's a big factor in all this too. We may not like talking about it, but like I said, it's the reality of the world we're living in. And part of that reality is that Dak Prescott signed a huge money contract. And if they try to go the Kirk Cousins route, you're talking about 31.4 this year, over 37 next year. And according to Adam Schefter, if they try to tag him a third year, that's potentially a 144% salary increase over that $37 million. The Cowboys don't want to be stuck on the handle for all that money. So how are they going to handle it? And how they handle it is going to be a big deal, because you have an Eagles team that has shown us they can manage the cap. They have shown us that they can maneuver the cap in ways to make sure they're still competitive. And as I said, when 2023 comes around and the Eagles only have a handful of guys who are stuck on big contracts, while the Cowboys have several guys stuck on big contracts, that means the next 3 to 4 years is a window for the Eagles to have more financial flexibility than who I think is their primary rival in the division in terms of competition, the Dallas Cowboys. And furthermore, with the quarterback uncertainty in Washington and New York, because let's be realistic, they were both rookies last year. We don't know exactly what those guys are going to be. New head coach in both cities. Who knows exactly what the offseason is going to be leading into, because there was no OTAs, there was no mini camps, there was no rookie time, as Doug Peterson calls it, grass time for a lot of these players. Ron Rivera and Joe Judge are walking in the training camp 2020 with pretty much almost no time hands-on of their coaching staff with those players. So who really knows what those franchises are going to look like in the next few years? I think we assume the Redskins defense is going to be good because of Chase Young and Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio going there, but I have no 100% guarantee that the Redskins offense is going to be really competitive. The Giants, I mean, that's a coin flip because they just overhauled the entire staff in New York, and Jason Garrett hasn't been an offensive coordinator in a decade. He's been a head coach / play caller, but not a full-time OC. So what is that going to look like in New York? What's Daniel Jones going to look like? We assume that the Giants made some improvements on the O-line because of drafting Thomas, but is he going to be ready to be up to speed? And how many years is it going to take for Jones and Haskins to play out before those franchises decide if that's the franchise quarterback or they got to go find a new one? So as far as I'm concerned, over the next few years, it's the Eagles and the Cowboys. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Cowboys handle some tough financial decisions while the Eagles have flexibility. Remember, $31.4 million accounts for about 14% of the Cowboys' salary cap this year. Yikes. And it could be 37 next year if they do another franchise tag. That's a lot of money in a world where we don't know if that salary cap is even going up next year. Do not be surprised if the Cowboys have to make tough decisions when the Eagles don't have to make the same decisions. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Reminder coming up in about 6 minutes, Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider, will join us coming up. What's going on with the NHL? What is going on with these hub cities? There's a lot to figure out right now in the NHL. This is an important week. You can go check it out at 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin Durso's latest article. He'll be joining us coming up about 6 minutes from now here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, text board is open at 609-403-0973. I want to remind you that 97.3 ESPN has teamed up with Seize the Deal for incredible weekly offers from some fantastic local restaurants. And here is this week's big deal. Get a $50 gift card to the High Point Pub, North Shore Road in Absecon for just $25. The High Point Pub has always had great deals, specials, and you can enjoy late-night outdoor dining until 2 a.m. Get this great deal right now at seizethedeal.com. Hurry, chances are this deal will sell quickly. For more info on this Seize the Deal opportunity, click on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Coming up next, speaking of that app, you can check out the article by Kevin Durso during the break here on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app as well. What is going on with the NHL? How could it impact the Flyers? Is the NHL going to Canada for their bubble? All those questions answered next here on the warm-up. Josh Hennig hanging out with you here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. 125 here on the warm-up. Josh Hennig hanging with you on 97.3 ESPN. What on earth is going on with the NHL and their return? A very extensive article right now at 97.3ESPN.com by our own Kevin Durso detailing all the different things going on. We'll jump into it all right now. As all guests, Kevin joins us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, how you doing this Monday?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So, to start it all off, all right, because obviously we can start in a lot of different places, but I think one of the biggest questions people have is what exactly is going on with the NHL's plans, because they gave a date for the start of Phase 3. You get one report that says that there's a bunch of players who are on the fence. You have another article that says with an interview that they're going to play, don't worry about it. You have another article and report that says that, well, they're going to Canada and that's going to assure them being able to play. So where are we actually on this conversation between the NHL and their players on them resuming play in July?
Yeah, there's a lot of different angles to come at this from this, and I think the first answer that we can give is no, nothing has changed with the plan for Phase 3 to this point. The league has said that everything that we've seen in the last few days has not changed anything. They're still targeting July 10th for Phase 3, and that's about as much as we know with any dates. There's a report out that they're going to try to get the game started in Phase 4 by the end of July, but that's all really fluid right now, and the reason that is because of the fact that the players still have to have a vote. It's at least an exec board vote among the Players Association to actually go through with this plan. And that's where the reports of some players being on the fence, some players want this to be a full player vote, not just their player reps who are working with the NHL Players Association. They want every player on every team to be able to vote and say, we're okay with this plan or not. And that can create some problems because there's quite possibly, according to some reports, there's upwards of 35-40% of players who are either in this situation as as members of the 24 teams that are left, who may not be okay with this plan, and certainly the recent news has created even more skepticism. And obviously, I think one of the first things that does need to happen, as you mentioned about talking about Canada and things like that, is nailing down the hub cities is going to be big because it'll allow the NHL to maybe finally provide some firm details on what life is going to be like in the two phases, because you need to be able to give the players some guide as to what they're allowed to do, how they will be tested, what's going to happen if players test positive, how you're going to navigate those waters should things happen. But there's also a really long way to get to that point because you still have about 3 weeks to get to Phase 3, and everything that right now revolves around local teams and their facilities, not putting them into this bubble that could help to mitigate some of the effects of the pandemic. So you've got a long way to go to get there. That's why I titled the article. It's a crucial week for the NHL because I think the thing that you're going to need to find happening this week, they need to have talks about what the players are going to have to go through to try to either get them on board or at least get an idea of how many players are on board with this and how many are not or are still on the fence based on what they're able to give. And you can do a lot of that by choosing your hub cities, which is expected to happen this week. I've seen it's down to 6 from the list of 10. I just found out within the last half hour Columbus is out of the running. So you still have you still have 9 other cities in there. But realistically, the 3 cities in Canada, Toronto, Edmonton, and Vancouver, keep coming up, and Vegas keeps coming up. And those are the 4 that really seem to have the most lasting power in all of the talk so far. But finding out which cities you do plan to go to can help the players get a better idea of what to expect in phases 3 and 4 and how they'll be tested, what they can do with their families. All the big questions that they seem to have could be answered once you kind of nail down what the hub cities are.
Now, sticking with the hub cities, we know that Canada came out over the weekend and said for the NHL, they would remove the quarantine. People entering Canada are supposed to go through a 14-day quarantine, but they would remove that for the NHL. So if they do go to Canada, we know that Canada has much, much, much lower rates of infection, number of infections, etc. when it comes to COVID-19. Could them choosing 1 or 2 of those Canadian cities really be the key for the NHL to tell the players, listen, we hear your concerns, here's our solution?
It certainly could be one of the keys. I don't know that any city is going to make every player feel completely comfortable. I think what's going to help more is, especially if one of those Canadian cities is able to accommodate, and as far as I'm concerned, I think that all 3 would probably be able to do this, is to allow – what the players would like to probably hear is that there's going to be a solution for what they get to do with their families and that there's going to be other things that they can do within these hub cities other than just go stay in a hotel, go to practice, play a game, go back and live hotel life for upwards of 2 to 3 months. They want to know that they have some freedoms, and that's part of the problem with what's going on right now in phase 2 is that there is no restriction. So players are still doing everything else in their normal lives around these local cities, and it's what happens in a city like Tampa Bay where 3 players test positive after being allowed to not only train in the team facility, but then to go to a grocery store and go grocery shopping if they had to and live their lives as usual. But it could lead to them getting infected in some way, especially in a state that is having rates rise rapidly. So maybe moving to a place like Canada can ease some minds there because of the fact that the rates are lower, but also I think just not only finding a place where the rates are lower, but also finding a place where families might be able to be included. And from my understanding, the league is willing to work with the players on this. That's the one great thing that the league has done is keep communication lines open. And it's both sides, obviously. So it's the NHL's executive board, it's Gary Bettman, it's Bill Daly, all those guys who have to work on the ownership side and the board of governors side, and the Players Association. The communication has been great. And quite frankly, one of the things I think that they did really well also is it was probably about 3 weeks to a month ago that the league came out with their plan of return to play, announced the 2014 thing, and said, we're going to do hub cities. And at that time, they were not going to give a specific location. They just gave you this list of 10 and said, we're going to pick 2. But they didn't rush into a decision. It's not like the NBA, who has been pumping out Orlando for the last few weeks, and now you have to kind of take a step back and go, well, Orlando doesn't look so comfortable anymore with the way rates are. The NHL was able to step back and kind of survey the options and go, where is it feel the safest? And maybe that becomes Canada now that Canada has allowed players to come back without having to worry about this quarantine period. And maybe it opens up some more possibilities for the NHL to be the league that actually finds a way to get back because they stepped back and didn't put all the eggs in one basket and try to find one location and give it out so early. They waited. They kind of have scoped out the environment, and now they're in the process of trying to pick cities as opposed to making a decision a month ago and seeing it fall apart.
Kevin Durso joining us on the Mobile Kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Kevin_Durso for all your Flyers and NHL coverage. Now, Kev, you and I talked a little bit over the weekend, and we both feel like Vancouver would probably be the best city. Give the folks out there an idea of what makes Vancouver appealing for an NHL bubble environment.
Well, Vancouver's a great city for it. And, I think back to Vancouver recently hosted an Olympic. They're able to kind of create that space where a lot of people are gathered at one time. They're able to isolate themselves in a good way. And it really does put you, I mean, it's virtually on an island. So you're in that spot. And like you think about how Vancouver's a location, people go out there, they shoot movies out there because they can get that kind of isolation. It can be away from a lot of the general public. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from Vancouver. And Vancouver has started to really emerge as a possibility. I mean, and I look at some of the other ones too. Toronto's not quite that kind of area. It's going to be much more metropolitan than Vancouver is, but I think that, I think the people of Canada might be able to understand the idea of shutting down a certain portion of the city strictly for the game of hockey, as opposed to someplace in the U.S. Vegas might be able to pull this off still because of the fact that strictly Vegas as a city has the hotel space and can probably easily create a bit of a bubble within itself, as opposed to other states where you're trying to work with major metro cities. But Vancouver, with the way that it's landscaped, with the way that it's already hosted a major event that created this kind of, it's the Olympic Village is created when you have the Olympics, and they've pulled it off and did it successfully. And I don't see why they wouldn't be able to do something like that in this case, to be able to host the NHL should the timing be right and should it allow for it.
Now, another element of news that happened over the weekend, you mentioned this as well in your article on 97.3 ESPN.com, Kevin, the players who have tested positive. So now that we have more information here on Monday, it looks like it was 11 out of 200. Now, some people, depends on who you ask. Some people say, well, out of 200, not a big deal. Other people might say anybody tested positive is a big deal. So how should we look at the positive tests in terms of the players in the NHL's plans moving forward?
Well, it's definitely a sign of caution. You have to take it very seriously, whether it was one player or whether it was 11. The thing that kind of stands out to me about the tests that came back positive, I think the significance falls in the two specific examples I mentioned in the article. One being the Tampa Bay Lightning, because it's multiple, it's 3 members, but not only is it 3 members, but it closes the facility down. That's a big red flag because now a facility's been closed. A team could be at a huge disadvantage if you have to close for any period of time at this point. It's going to create some questions for all these other places. There was reportedly a player for the Boston Bruins who also was tested positive at some point during phase 2, but it kind of flew under the radar because of the fact that the situation became isolated. The player wasn't named, and they didn't have to shut anything down as a result. The player ended up isolated, was doing fine, recovering, and there was no other instance of a positive test with anybody who he may have been working out with. And there was no word that it actually happened in Boston's training facility per se, but it flew under the radar because there was no further action beyond a positive test. So it made it feel like that one case was exactly what the NHL had hoped, that 1 or 2 positive tests wouldn't derail the whole thing. 3 that closes down a facility had a little bit more impact, and then obviously the situation with the players training in Arizona, one of them being reportedly Austin Matthews, put a name like that with a positive test, and that rings louder than anything else. All these other unidentified players, and the league is not specifically identifying anybody. It's just strictly a report. We don't know that for certain. The player didn't confirm, the team didn't confirm, an agent didn't confirm. But that's the report that's out there. And when you have a name like that circulating around the league, it is going to have, whether it's true or not, it's going to have an impact on the players who do see that information. A star player gets this, and you're going to be worried about every player in the league no matter what. And that's the 2 stories that seem to have the biggest impact when it comes to positive tests, is one that shuts down a team facility and one where, at least by a report, it's one of the top players in the game today. Those are the 2 that really stand out.
One thing that also stood out to me about that Austin Matthews story, as I read it over the weekend, Kevin, was also it was kind of like further down the story, which was he was working out with Toronto's goaltender, Frederik Andersen. Andersen didn't test positive, but Austin did. And it seems like that we're getting some inconsistent information about who is actually testing positive and how it's spreading, because it seems like we thought we had an idea of how fast this could or couldn't spread, and it seems like in certain circumstances it's not. For example, there was a Broncos player. He was out. He tested positive. None of his other teammates did. So what do we do when we find out that, Austin Matthews tested positive, but the guy he was directly working out with didn't?
Well, what we do is exactly what happened. And to cite what story you're talking about, not only did it mention that they had worked out together, but I believe I saw it also said Frederick Anderson was living with Austin Matthews.
Correct, yes.
And living in the same situation, to say living with someone you actually spent more time than just what you're doing training, and to still find out that you're negative, that is a positive in the sense. Like that's a positive detail comes out that shows that there's a way to kind of work around it. The key is to make sure that a test happens for anybody else who was closely working with them just as quickly as Frederick Anderson got one, and to find out that those players are negative. And that's what the NHL is going to try to do in phases 3 and 4, where testing is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be daily in phase 3, but it's going to be close to. And by phase 4, you're going to have a daily test to find out who has it and who doesn't. And that will help to at least trace everything back so you know who's got it and who doesn't. And some of the players who are on board with possibly voting in favor of the league's plan to return to play are the ones who have gone through team training facilities and have seen what testing is like a little bit. To get an idea that this is how they're going to conduct tests, this is how they're going to find out that you're okay and that you're capable of playing your negative test and you can go ahead with your routine like usual. That might help to put some peace of mind into some of the players that as long as I'm being tested regularly and I find out that I don't have it, and even if one of my teams gets it and I get a negative test, it works out. There's also, a lot of false positives coming out too. There have been false positives. They had players go back in to get tested. It's not going to mean that 11 players who tested positive were all false, but that number could, there could be 1 or 2 cases in that turn out to be false positives later, or maybe weren't as significant in terms of symptoms as others, and maybe help to create a negative sooner in terms of a recovery. So who knows? I mean, there's a lot of things to factor in here, but I don't think that 11 out of an excess of 200, as it was quoted by the NHL statement, it's concerning that it's 11, but I think that and this is again why this week is so crucial. I think another part of this week being crucial is seeing what happens, because the NHL is now going to issue weekly updates on tests. So if this week comes out and not only do you have a lower number potentially of players testing positive, but you also have a good update on the 11 that did, and maybe 5 of them to that point have recovered in some way, that might be a positive sign going forward that you have a way of working around this. That's what the league needs to find at this point, is positive to still be able to navigate around it, and maybe that'll help players buy in a little more and feel comfortable enough to go ahead with this, especially when you're talking about potentially involving their families in this equation as well.
Kevin, as of June 22nd, 2020, if you had to put a number on the likelihood percentage that we're going to see hockey actually being played next month, what would you put it at in your educated opinion?
I think I'd say 50-50 for next month. I think that at some point down the road, I'd probably say 60-40. And I just say it because to say in the next month, to say it'll happen for sure in July, I don't know that I want to bank on that, because there's so many steps that have to happen with negotiations with a collective bargaining agreement to extend the league year and to get the players to sign off on this return to play plan, and then get back into training and actually have phase 3. All that has to happen to actually see a physical hockey game within the next month. But I do think that as things go on, especially, it's going to take something really dramatic then, because if 11 tests out of somewhere in the 200 range didn't shut the whole thing down, then it's going to take something pretty significant to do that. And I think once you get the hub cities announced, once you start to have more discussions, the NHL is going to find a way to get through to the players that this is how it's going to happen. And they might even have to do it in a sense where they allow players to opt out of this plan and say, you know what, I just don't feel comfortable with this, I'm not playing. But the ones who do will go ahead and play, and you'll find a way to create teams around that. It certainly would change things. It changes a little bit of potentially the integrity of the way that the game is played from there, because might not be the exact same teams you're used to, but it would get the game back on the ice. And I think that's the common end goal here, is that the Players Association, at least the people at the top of the Players Association, certainly want to see this happen. The league wants to see it happen, and they're going to do everything in their power to get it done. So I certainly think that there is a more likely than not chance that this will still go through. It's just a matter of the timing of it and seeing how much they can get done over the course of this week and the next few to follow.
Follow Kevin on Twitter at Kevin_Durso. Also, check out his extensive article on why this week is so important for the NHL right now at 973ESPN.com. And as all guests, Kevin appeared right here on the Bulwark Honda Hotline. Kevin, appreciate all the information here on a Monday, and I'm sure we'll be in touch as the NHL starts turning the corner on these decisions.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Josh. Appreciate it.
Josh Hennig here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. One more segment coming up before the Sports Bash right here on the warm-up. Mike Gill, Hunter Brody, they got a busy day coming up ahead of them, talking baseball and basketball and football and more. But we got one more segment of the warm-up first before we get to the Sports Bash right here on 97.3 ESPN and 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Want to remind you that 97.3 ESPN has teamed up with Seize the Deal for an incredible weekly offers from some fantastic local restaurants. Here is this week's big deal. Get a $50 gift card to the High Point Pub, North Shore Road in Absecon for just $25. High Point Pub always has great specials, and you can enjoy late-night outdoor dining till 2 a.m. Get this great deal starting now at seizethedeal.com. Hurry, chances are this deal will sell quickly. For more info on this Seize the Deal opportunity, check out the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. 609-403-0973. By the way, shout out to the texter who chimed in begrudgingly. You hit it again on the UFC. Good job. That was the same guy who told me over the weekend that you shouldn't bet Tisha Torres because she has a horrible nickname. Listen, she does have a horrible nickname, but I'm not going to let that get in the way of me making a good pick. Listen, there have been some horrible nicknames in the history of sports. Doesn't make the athlete any less of an athlete. It just means that the people around them made some bad decisions in their life. I mean, Tiny Tornado is a pretty weak nickname. But hey, you know what? Winners are winners. Tweet just came out from John Heyman just a couple minutes ago on baseball. The MLB players are meeting this afternoon and are again expected to vote on the 60-game framework. Some key union people like the grievance being kept as an option, which would mean rejecting a deal. The commissioner tweaked the framework yesterday in hopes of getting a yes vote and not having to implement a season. That's from John Heyman just a few minutes ago. I feel like baseball is just on the road to just implosion at this point. Like, I feel like baseball, they're just destined to never make this work at this point. And I know that sounds very negative for someone like me who tries to be a glass half full person, but I really think that at some point, baseball just needs to admit how stupid and ridiculous they are. At some point, baseball needs to realize that you guys can't get along. You're more interested in being right and being a winner than doing what's best for the game. If you're legitimately concerned about the COVID-19 positive tests and the escalating numbers, that's fine. I'm all for that. I'm all for saying, hey, man, this is a messy situation. We probably shouldn't be doing this, or we should, take a closer look. I'm all for that. But the fact that we're still drawing lines on 60 games, 70 games, 65 games, or is what Jeff Passan reported, it's an argument over $240 million. It's just horrible. And it's pathetic. And it's cheap. It's cheap in terms of the fact that you either want to play baseball or you don't. If you're serious about playing baseball, then let's get to the real problem. The real problem is the whole sports world shut down because of a pandemic, not because the players and the owners can't get along over money. So either the players need to put up or shut up and stop playing games with everybody, and the owners need to stop being a bunch of jerks and stop acting like that they're so much smarter than everybody else and know what's best for the game. Just put up or shut up. Vote or come out and explain why we can't start a season. Stop pulling our heartstrings. Stop throwing us all over the yard. Stop telling us that, we're trying. You're not trying. You're just sitting out there and saying, I want to be right. I want to win. You're just a bunch of children. I mean, Manfred and Clark aren't leaders. They're just a bunch of anglers who are trying to represent two sides that don't want to admit the other side might have a point. The fact that Manfred and Clark sat down last week and thought that they had positive progress, and then they turn around and say, well, we didn't really have an agreement. That sounds like to me that both sides are operating on a level of being disingenuous. You want to talk about COVID-19 and concerns about the pandemic? I'm all for that. But crying over games and money makes you look like a bunch of jerks. Baseball at this point is DOA until they realize that they are a bunch of turds for going out there and acting like they are always having to be right. My side has to be right. You don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, for goodness sake, you look like a bunch of idiots. Oh, how about this? News coming down that Rob Manfred is expected to speak this afternoon. Oh, that should be juicy. Manfred saying anything at this point is a combination of brazen and horrible. I don't know what exactly combination of brazen and horrible looks like, but it's probably anything that comes out of Rob Manfred's mouth at this point. I can guarantee you that the Sports Bash with Mike Gill and Hunter Brody will be touching on whatever Manfred says coming up. Because holy Toledo, Batman, this is getting ridiculous. Jared Diamond, scheduled to come on the show coming up at 3 o'clock today, talk more about baseball. Also football at 4 p.m. Jeff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, going to join the guys. We talked about to start the show here on the warm-up. Dak Prescott, $31.4 million. What does that mean for the Cowboys? What does that mean for the Eagles? I'm sure the guys will touch on that coming up as well. Also, Michael Kasky-Blomain, CBS Sports. What is going on with the NBA? June 24th is the day the players, the deadline. They got to let the league know. Are they in or are they out? One guy's already come out and said he's out. David Bertans, the three-point phenom from the Wizards. And according to Woj, he says that part of the reason why Bertans is going to sit out is because he has a history of injuries. Which is interesting because it was just a week and change ago that Jason Tatum said they wanted to find out, could they get their insurance extended for all the players who are going to be up for free agency moving forward.